Modal verbs can be used to express a lot of different ideas, including advice, expectation, habit, permission, intention, deduction, necessity, ability, and more. In fact, a single modal verb can hold a few distinct meanings. To make sense of the various modal applications, we can sort them into 4 categories, or 4 flavors of modality. There's arguably a 5th flavor, called alethic, but it's both the least commonly used and rarely if ever presented in English language teaching, so don't worry about that one. The 4 modal flavors are ability and tendency, willingness and intent, permission and obligation, and possibility and likelihood. Notice that these descriptors come in pairs. The first in each pair represents potential and is usually expressed through can or could. Most other modals tend to express the second of each pair and are compelling. This should make more sense as we go along. Before we continue, know that this video is designed to help educators and advanced learners deepen their understanding of modal verbs. Early learners should probably take modals one flavor at a time, if even that much. Alright, our first flavor is about the subject putting the verb into practice. Can and could express the subject's ability or capability. This might be a natural talent or a skill developed over time, or it might be determined by the subject's capacity or availability in a particular circumstance. For instance, Calvin can't carry that box might mean that Calvin isn't strong enough to lift it, or it might be that Calvin's hands are full at the moment, so he'll have to come back for that box later. This flavor also uses various modals to convey inclinations or habits, one might even say compulsions, as in, rabbits will scurry when frightened, or her little sister could be so annoying. Apart from modal auxiliaries, we might use the phrases used to, tend to, be able to, and be prone to for this flavor. The next flavor expresses the subject's volition. Can and could express the subject's willingness. Whether they do carry out the verb is probably dependent upon someone else's desire or approval. The other core modals express various levels of intention, whether the speaker is proposing an action, stating the subject's determination or hesitance, or committing to a promise. These modals are extremely common, but they typically aren't presented as a modal topic in English language teaching. Instead, they are featured in topics about future forms, namely as future plans. Will is the strongest option here, or shall in formal contexts. May and might are used when the speaker is indecisive. Apart from the core modal auxiliaries, we can use care to and dare for this flavor, along with suppletive phrases such as be going to, be planning to, and be about to. Those first 2 flavors might be called dispositional, meaning they are dependent upon the subject's mood or performance, or dynamic, meaning they exist beyond the speaker's control. The speaker is whoever expresses the sentence, whether or not it's spoken aloud. But these next 2 flavors are the reverse. They have less to do with the characteristics of the subject and instead reflect the knowledge or beliefs of the speaker. Consider permission and obligation, which express the speaker's understanding of regulations or enforcement of ideals. Can and could, as well as may and might, either request or grant permission. Should is used for advice. Must is a strong obligation, and will and shall are directives, not unlike the imperative sentence structure. These modals compel the subject to do the action. Linguists call this flavor Deontic, which means duty. Expressed regulations are usually dependent upon external forces like laws, ethical standards, societal norms, expert opinion, etc., though they could be based on the speaker's own values or preferences. Most negative modals in this flavor might be referred to as modals of prohibition. Sometimes when these modals are set in a past context, they express regret or rebuke. In addition to the core modals, we can use the quasi-modals get to, ought to, have to, need to, had better, and more. We could also use suppletive phrases like be allowed to, be required to, and be supposed to, just to name a few. There are many ways to express permission and obligation. The final modal flavor expresses what the speaker suspects or expects to be true. With can and could, the speaker acknowledges that the expressed action, event, or state is possible. With the other core modals, the speaker voices various degrees of certainty as to whether it's true. May and might are fairly uncertain, should is moderately certain, and must is very certain. Will and shall convey unquestioned confidence, as if there aren't any plausible alternatives. These modals can express expectations and predictions about the future, or they can express deductions about what happened in the past. Linguists call this flavor epistemic, which refers to knowledge. So when we talk about modal likelihood or probability, it's not about random chance, but instead about the speaker's speculation and how compelling they find the evidence or logic. Apart from the core modals, we use ought to, have to, and have got to for this flavor, along with suppletive phrases like be expected to, be likely to, or be going to. In case you're wondering, why are these the flavors of modal verbs? It turns out that these categories are not arbitrary, but reflect human nature and society. We can find parallels between modal flavors and concepts like aspects of the self, personality types, virtues, and writing styles. In sequence, these flavors reflect childhood development, or, in reverse, stages of grief. These are just a handful of examples, but the point is that modal verbs, like language as a whole, are designed to convey our experiences and relationships. Now, despite the fact that we have distinguished categories, an application of a modal verb doesn't always fall neatly into one flavor or another. On occasion, the line between two flavors might be blurred. For instance, if you ask whether someone can lend you a hand, you might be wondering about their availability and capacity, and about their willingness to help you out. More commonly, though, there might be ambiguity in the interpretation. For example, Lila must be very quiet might be instructions for Lila to stay quiet, perhaps because she's entering a library. Or, Lila must be very quiet might mean that the speaker has deduced that Lila is already quiet if they haven't been able to hear her. Maybe she's hiding. Often, but not always, we can rely on context to determine the correct interpretation. So, why do you need to know modal flavors? Well, first, it's important to acknowledge that each modal auxiliary has multiple meanings with different applications. Second, the various modal flavors actually have slightly different grammar rules. For instance, how do you express the past with modals? How does the meaning change when you add have after the modal? What are the differences between can versus could, may versus might, and will versus would? The answer to each of these and more depends on the flavor. Furthermore, each quasi-modal term and each suppletive phrase only applies to certain flavors. Most grammar resources present modals one flavor at a time, though they might call them by different names or only feature certain subcategories within a flavor. Should for advice and must for obligation might be presented separately or together since they are the same flavor. But teaching advice and deduction together, or obligation and habits together, would likely lead to confusion. Finally, if you're going to include more than one modal expression in the same verb chain, their order depends on the flavors. There's plenty more to learn about each modal flavor, and the details of each are better explored in their own topics. But simply knowing the different categories of modality can provide direction on how to learn and apply modal expressions.